Run our employee check prices. And what I'm going to do here is the first item will be a ticker and then that stock's price. So we'll say Apple is at 200, and I'm just completely making up these numbers. Then we'll say Google is at, say, $400. And then finally, we'll say Microsoft, $100. Okay, so we already know that I can actually say for item in stock prices, print item, and it prints out the tuples. I also know that I can do tuple unpacking, which means I can actually individually grab the items from these tuples. So I can say for price, or actually for ticker and price in stock prices, print, let's say, just a ticker. Run that, and what it is, print, let's say, just a ticker. Run that, and what it's doing is it's unpacking ticker and price separately, so I can do different things with them, such as ticker, or maybe I can say print price plus, let's say, 0.1 times price. So I want to see what a 10% increase would look like. So I can run that, and now I can see a 10% increase in the prices. Okay, so that's tuple unpacking. Now we've seen how we can do it with a for loop, but we can also do it with a function. So a function can actually return things as tuples, and then we can unpack the result from the function. So let's go ahead and do kind of a more complicated example here. I'm going to say work hours, and this is going to be a list of tuples that has an employee name, let's say Abby, and then the hours they happen to work that particular month. So we have Abby at 100 hours. Let's go ahead and have Billy at 400 hours, just kind of making these up. And then let's have Cassie, whoops, make sure that's a string, at 800 hours. So kind of extreme values here, but they're totally made up. Okay, so we have these work hours over some period of time. And now what we want to do is we want to see who is the employee of the month, or the employee of the year. And the way we judge that is by the employee that has worked the most hours. And we want to return not just the employee name, but also the amount of hours worked. So I need a function that can actually then go through these tuples and then see the name and the corresponding hours and keep track of the name that has the most hours. So how can we do this? I'll create a function called employee check, and it accepts this list of tuples, work. work hours. And then as I've stated before, typically we're going to have placeholder variables when it comes to logic at the very top of a function. So I'm going to have two placeholder variables. I'm going to have a current max, and I'm going to set it equal to 0. And then I'm going to have an employee, let's say of the month in this case. We'll say employee of month, and that's equal to an empty string. Because at the end, I intend to return a tuple. So I intend to return a tuple that says employee of the month along with the current max, which is the current max hours. So why do I have current max equal to 0, and what is current max going to do? Well, what current max is going to do is it's going to start off at 0, and then it's going to compare each employee's hours to the current max hours. And if they beat the current max hours, then I will reset the current max to their value, and I'll reset the employee of the month to this string. So we have to do a for loop to see this. We'll say for, and here we'll do some tuple unpacking, for employee, comma, hours, in work hours, which recall is this list of tuples. What I'm going to do is I'm first going to check if the hours that they've worked is greater than my current max, then I'm going to reset my current max equal to the hours that that particular employee worked. And then the employee of the month is going to be equal to the employee in that tuple. So what does that actually mean? Well, recall that my current max starts off at 0. So immediately, the very first person I see has beat, supposedly, 0 hours. So that means Abby starts off as employee of the month, and my current max hours to beat is 100 hours. Otherwise, I'll simply pass. So let's go ahead and see what happens when we reach Billy. We see Billy, we extract Billy's hours is 400. Is that greater than the current max hours? Well, in this case it is, because Abby only worked 100. So then I reset the current max, essentially the target to beat, as 400, and then I set Billy as the employee of the month. And I keep going throughout this. So then Cassie is going to end up beating Billy's 400 hours, and then she'll be the employee of the month. And what I'm going to do is return this to the employee of the month. the month. And I keep going throughout this. So then Cassie is going to end up beating Billy's 400 hours, and then she'll be the employee of the month. And what I'm going to do is return this then as a tuple. So again, here's all the code. Let me go out one level of zoom so we can see this all. Going to run this, and let's run our employee check. And I'm going to run it on my current existing work hours. That's the variable we first assigned. And as we suspected, Cassie won. So let's make sure this is working. Let's go ahead and say Billy worked 4,000 hours. So we run this again, employee check, run that, and now I see Billy 4,000. So again, what it's doing here is it's just tracking who worked the max hours, and essentially who do we have to beat. And eventually what's going to happen is we'll find out who worked the max hours because no one will start beating this equation right here of hours greater than the current max, which means we never ended up resetting current max, and we never end up overriding that employee of the month. So essentially, once Billy comes in and he hits 4,000, Cassie doesn't end up beating him with 800, so Billy stays as the assigned variable employee of the month. Now we just saw this returned back this tuple. So what we can do is two things. I can either say result is equal to employee check, and if I take a look at result, it says Billy 4,000, or just as before with the for loop, we'll look at result. It says Billy 4,000, or just as before with the for loop where I said ticker comma price, I can do the same thing if a function returns back this tuple. So it's really common to see something like this. I can say name comma hours is equal to employee check work hours, run that, and note what happened. Unlike before where results, if we see it here, is the tuple. I did tuple unpacking, and now I have the name Billy and hours as separate variables. So I can actually perform tuple unpacking with a function call. Now, a really common error is when you're using someone else's function or a function from a different library that you're not too familiar with, maybe we think that, oh, this function also gives the employee's location. So let's see the result here. Let's say name, comma hours, comma location. Now I know for a fact it doesn't report back the location. If you run this, you get an error. And this is a very common error where it says, not enough values to unpack. And very common error to get when you're dealing with functions that you don't 100% know what they return. So you notice here, back to the Jupyter Notebook. All right, here I am in the Jupyter Notebook. mod 4 here instead of. So when I function whatever you want, the result is true. And then I can say even check on 21, and it returns false. 21 is not even. Now, for beginners, it's really common to separate things out into multiple lines like this. But keep in mind, I don't actually need to save this as a result parameter. Instead, I can directly return number mod 2 is equal to 0. So if I paste that in, this is actually the exact same thing. So if I run this again, I get the same results. So again, it's really common for beginners to kind of duplicate lines when really you can just return something that is the Boolean check. So we have a function that can check if a single number is even, and then it returns back a Boolean, true or false, whether or not it's even. Let's go ahead and check inside of a list. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to start off a new function, and this function is going to return true if any number is even inside a list. Okay, so again, there just has to be a single even number inside of a list, and the list can be as long as you want, and it's going to return true if that happens to be the case. Otherwise, it will not return anything. So we'll say def, and I will call this now check even list. It takes in a parameter, and now this parameter is going to be assumed to be a list. So we'll say num list. And what I need to do is I need to loop through each number. So we're going to start adding in logic that we already learned about, like a for loop. So I can say the following. For every number in the num list, and recall num list is going to be passed in by the user, I'm going to have another colon here. And notice how now we have different layers of indentation. I have this first one, which is everything inside the function. And now I'm going to have this second one, which is everything inside this for loop. So for number in num list, first let me check if I get a so-called hit on an even number. So if that number, mod 2, is equal to 0, well, I'm technically already done. Since I'm just checking if any number is within a list, then the very first time that I hit an even number, I can pretty much return true. So I will say, whoops, forgot my colon there. If number mod 2 is equal to 0, I'll return true. So note here that I'm going to go through every number in the list, and the very first time I get number mod 2 is equal to 0, then I go ahead and return true. And what I'm going to do is say else, and I'm going to use the pass keyword. And pass just means don't do anything. So let's go ahead and look at the logic here. I pass in this list of numbers. I start going through every number in the number list. If I get an even number by saying if true, then I go ahead and return true here. Else, so let's say this is an odd number, I'm just going to pass. I'm not going to do anything. So notice here, return is actually in the middle of the function. It doesn't always have to go at the end. And in fact, we'll show you in just a second how you can have multiple returns inside of a function. So let's first check that this actually works. I'm going to say check even list, and let's pass in a list that has all odd numbers. Notice nothing is returned. Now let's say check even list that has two even numbers in it, and it returns back true. There is an even number there. And let's do a couple of edge cases just to make sure this is working. Let's go ahead and have the first number be even. It returns true. And let's go ahead and have the last number be even. And that also returns true. Okay, so it looks like it's working. So what it's doing is just looping through these numbers until it finds an even one, and then it just breaks out of the function and returns true. And in fact, you can think of this return statement as essentially going to break off the entire function and end the function call. Once you call return, that's it. The function's over. It's not being run anymore. So currently, our function doesn't return anything if there is no even number in the list. Let's say we actually want it to return false. How can we fix this? A super common mistake that a beginner would make is they would simply change else here to return false. However, this is wrong. Why is this wrong? Well, I just mentioned you can think of return as essentially breaking out of this function. So why is it wrong to put return false here when it was correct to put return true? Often beginners make the mistake that all the return statements should have the same level of indentation, but that's actually not true. Because look what's going to happen here. We're going to say for number in number list, and then the very first time that a number is not even, we'll say, okay, in other words, just return false. Essentially saying that this if-else statement is only going to be able to check one number because both conditions will immediately return something. So if I were to actually run this, let's go ahead and run this on, let's say 135. So that returned false correctly, but now let's put in a 2 there. It should return true, but notice it returns false because it's essentially only checking the first number since there's a return call on either condition that the first number has. So that means this return should actually not be here. In fact, where should it be? Well, I want to make sure I've already checked every single number and whether or not it's even by the time I return false. So the return false should actually be in indentation with the for loop here. So what this says is go ahead and complete the entire for loop. If this has completed and we never broke out of the function with this return statement, then go ahead and then return false. So let's go ahead and run this and see if that works.
Definition check underscore even underscore list num list for number in num list. If number mod 2 is equal to 0, return true. Else pass, return false. Else में पहले pass फिर return false.
So notice 125 returns true. If I change this to 135, now it correctly returns false. Again, a super common mistake beginners make is they think all the returns have to be indented together. But we can see we really need to focus on the logic of what's happening here. We want to loop through all the numbers first, and we can use these pass statements as placeholders to essentially say, don't do anything. And that will be very useful when you have a function that needs or requires multiple return statements. Let's expand this one more level of complexity. Let's imagine that we actually want to return all the even numbers in the list. So I don't just want to say true or false, is there an even number? I actually want to return them. So let's go ahead and start adjusting our check even list. So again, what we want to do here is I want to return all the even numbers in a list. And if there are no even numbers, we'll go ahead and just return an empty list. So what do I need to do here? Well, this code may come in handy, so I'll keep it for now. But what I'm going to do is start off with an empty placeholder list. We'll say even numbers is equal to an empty list. And it's very common at the top of a function call, if you intend on returning something, if you don't have it defined as an argument, that you define it up here as some sort of placeholder. So often you'll have placeholder or false anymore. What do I actually want to return for okay. So when there's an even number, do I do something? And then I return the even numbers list. Let's go ahead and check this out. I'm going to do the
तो गाइस हो गए 30 मिनट्स, पता भी नहीं चला टाइम का. थैंक यू.